Hey Kai, how you doing?
Doing okay. How are you?
Tired, long day.
Tired? Long day? Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
It's
Hey,
gonna be
this is Kenrick. This is one of our students.
yeah,
There should be a few more people joining us shortly.
no
Uh,
problemo.
yeah, maybe before we start, I can give you a kind of brief overview of who everyone is and yeah, what everyone's here for. So there'll be roughly 10 or so students joining us today.
Okay,
Or about half of them will be from our first Rocket Academy's first batch, and about the other half will be from Rocket Academy's second batch. And the first batch is graduating in April, second batch is graduating in July, roughly. And they well, yeah, the course is about a 6 month long course. So just coming off of a 6 month boot camp where you're learning all the fundamentals of software engineering from front end, back end, to cloud, to a bit of data structures and algorithms, to a bit of data science and mobile, and just kind of the whole overview of everything.
cool,
Yeah,
cool.
and pretty much everybody is a career switcher in the sense that nobody studied computer science formally in university. Most people studied, yeah, it was not even some people studied engineering, but other people studied humanities subjects like political science or other subjects like accounting and some students haven't been to university yet. Some students are in between university, in
Mm.
between high school and university. Yeah,
No, that's cool. And
and
look,
some students have been working for many years. We have one student who is in the horse racing industry for many years, and then is recently coming into tech, and she's awesome. Yeah,
nice. Sounds exciting.
yeah. So all career switchers, all getting into tech and software engineering for the first time, and just really excited to hear from people who are in the industry, just to get a better sense of what it's like to be a software engineer, how to get a job as a software engineer, how to progress in one's career as a software engineer, these
Cool,
kinds of things.
no problem.
Cool. Hey guys, and Akira is here. Akira is our head of education. Uh, yeah, Akira. Yeah, Akira just coming out of hosting the batch two's class. Yeah.
There we go. I got my little gallery thing going. All
Oh,
right,
there you go.
awesome.
Yeah.
Hi there, nice to meet you, Akira.
Hey. Okay,
Hello.
I think this is most people. There should be a few more people trickling in the next couple of minutes, but I think we can probably get started. So super excited to welcome Alan here today. Alan is from a esteemed software agency
Oh, no.
called Versent. Versent is a kind of, I don't know if it's true, high-end software agency.
Uh, it's okay. I'll forgive you on that one, Kai. I'm happy to do the intro, if only because to be fair to Kai, we are not from Singapore, so we're not
Yes.
homegrown, so we are not that well known within Singapore. But I hope that over the course of the next, you know, hour or so, we can answer some of those questions you guys have, especially with regards to what it actually is like to be in the software industry and what, to a certain extent, what does it mean in 2021 to say I'm a software professional. So yeah, to kickstart this, I'm just gonna start from here. Okay, so
Awesome. Perfect.
yeah, so Versant has its roots in Australia, to be precise, Melbourne, Australia, and actually we started out of one of the largest banks in Australia, and it just so happens that the founder of Versant at the time happened to be the CIO and basically the head of IT at that bank. And at that time, I coincidentally was also in that bank as an intern. So from their perspective, they tell it as at that time when I stepped into the bank, all I could think was, what is wrong with this place? Why is everything so bad? And from my perspective, being an intern at the time, my experience was, wow, this is IT. I'm out of here. And I ended up quitting IT from that point. So yeah, we didn't directly meet at that time, but we had a kind of a coincidental same starting point. So they saw the problem from the position of I'm a business, I'm an organizational leader. I need to have certain things developed and I need to have certain qualities to the software, to the teams, to the people that I lead. But when I look around, this is all I have. And from the opposite perspective, as a new person enthusiastic to start in the industry at the time, I looked at what they were doing at one of the big organizations, which was, kind of representing what Australia had to offer at that point in time, maybe around 2002, 2003. And yeah, I was underwhelmed. So at that time, that was the state of affairs in Australia, which to a certain extent, now that I've come to Singapore for the last 3 years, some of it feels very, very, very similar. And the parts that don't feel similar tend to be just the difference of the scale. To give you a general idea of the difference, the bank that I'm talking about, the National Australia Bank, it has employees. Let's be generous. Let's say they have about 1,000 employees all up in the whole bank, in every area you can imagine, including like cleaning and facilities and all that kind of stuff. DBS has in excess of 20,000+ people. Citibank is global, has in excess of, has even much more than that. So most of the banks we deal with on a day-to-day basis now, they all easily exceed that by more than 20 times. So that obviously leads to some unique differences compared to what I was used to back then. But to continue on the story, after doing a stint as the CIO and the head of IT in that space, the founder of Versent, Tor and James, they're two of the founders, they got so sick of it that they said, "Nah, forget it, I'm done. Surely there is a better way to do this, like technology, IT, software development. I know that it can be done better. And you know what? I'm going to prove to you that it can be done better." So they quit the bank and they opened Versent. That were at that point in time, for the first 8 months, they were about 3 to 4 people working out of a cafe, because their heartland is in enterprise clients. And the good thing about enterprise client is that once you land a deal, it tends to be fairly large. The downside of enterprise client is that in Australia, even with the right connections, chasing the contract was anywhere from 8 months to a year. In Singapore, we spent close to 2 years chasing our first client before I landed on the ground. So, pros and cons of the way the company addressed the startup. So relative to a traditional startup, so you guys are probably much more familiar with the startup scene. So for you guys, you probably hear about the growth in the startup phase, and you guys probably think by 8 months, surely that's where you're meant to have like 6 to 10 people all very excited, just about to ramp up. Now, Versent did it slightly differently, but the difference was we hit 8 months with about 4 people. They signed the first contract, and then we progressed from about 4 people to about 30, 40 people in the next 3-4 months. So that's kind of a bit of a difference in how the scaling happened there. So yeah, and as of the time I left Versent 3 years ago, we had been in business for the fourth year, and we were the AWS APAC Partner of the Year, Consulting Partner of the Year for 3 years at that point. I think we've picked up a few other bits and pieces since then, because since I've been in Singapore, to be honest, I've kind of been stuck in the client, so haven't really cared about those kind of accolades. And based on the way that AWS and cloud is working in Singapore in general, to be honest, it's kind of like I've gone back in time. So to a certain extent, I don't even really care that much about the state of the art anymore, because now I'm no longer being asked, how do we push the edge of what can be done with cloud? I'm being asked things like, how do you spell Git? So yeah. So on the one hand, I would like to, I say this partially tongue in cheek, but I'd like to say, if you guys can spell Git, you even know how to use Git, and you know at least one programming language to the stage where you actually know how to use the language, I think there's going to be a future for you in Singapore. Let's just put it that way. So yeah, it's a great industry, and I think it's a great time for you guys to be doing this. And I think the government has never been more supportive, and the environment in Singapore has never ever been more supportive than right now to go finding a role as a software professional of some sort. So obviously, like, bit of a disclaimer, I came from a computer science research background, and I was a developer to start with, but I now tend to do more work in the cloud and DevOps automation space. But when I say that in Singapore, I have to preface this with, before you throw anything at me, please go read Google, Facebook, Discord, have a look at what they mean when they say DevOps and SRE. That's what I mean, not the DevOps and SRE that people do in Singapore in general. So yeah, once we, at the time I left Australia, we were around 300-ish people there, and I was employee number 1 on the ground in Singapore. And fast forward 3 years now, we are ramping up to about 30. I'm about to hire another 4 to 8 directly in for initiative on my project. And I know we're still actively looking for everyone from engineers up to principal engineers. And yeah, we were previously looking for some software guys, Kai, but it looks like that stuff has been, the priority on that has been changed. And even some of the Australian guys we had, they've been pulled back into some internal projects there. But that's okay, because the DevOps side of things is, what the Singapore business is going to be based more on for the short term anyway. Yeah, so I hope that kind of gives you a quick overview of what my background is and where I come from. So if anything sounds strange or doesn't quite match what you know, please just shout out and just tell me, hey, wait a second, I heard XYZ or I see XYZ. Why is that so different from what you see, from what you're talking about? Chances are it's either because of the industries we focus in, or just because I'm Australian. I think of Singapore. I think of Singapore as MBFC plus the Bay. And I finally went out for a ride to Amokyo yesterday, and I was like, oh wow, this doesn't look like Singapore.
Nice.
So yeah,
Alan,
please,
before we organized the Q&A, we were talking about the Versent Experience Accelerator Program and how that could be a potential opportunity for Rocket Academy students as well. Maybe before we start with the Q&A, you can also share a little bit about that program. And
no problem.
that's all. Yeah.
In Australia, it's usually considered polite to offer some services first before you spring. But hey, I'm happy to sell first.
Yeah, I think people will have questions. I think people have questions about the program as well. So I think maybe it's good to.
Cool. So the Versent Experience Accelerator is meant as a foundational entry point into a professional career for Versent. We have built a large part of our presence in Singapore when faced with the likes of, we are actually in direct competition with the likes of Deloitte, Accenture, KPMGs, and other digital departments as well. So we have found our success and our place by focusing on certain core things. And this is the thinking behind the VEAP. And the core of it is actually that at Versent, we fundamentally have a different approach to how we view an engineer's position. So, and just to give you guys a bit of a background, in Versent right now, even at close, 300 to 400-ish people, we have close to 70% that don't have any formal education beyond high school equivalent. Like, so for us, it's the, it's the BCE. I'm not sure, what is it here, A levels?
Yeah.
Yeah, A levels, yeah. So a large percentage of the population of Versent engineers and senior engineers and principal engineers, they never went near uni or any sort of further education. And I guess to a certain extent, that is because of Australia as a country. The competition, the nature of things is such that you don't really need to go to university in order to get someone to give you a try, because you put up your hand, you see someone with a problem, you put up your hand, you do the job, you're now in the industry. You can't do the job. Oops, maybe I may need to train myself a bit better, or I may need to fix it up. But to a certain extent, that approach also builds a certain sort of initiative, which is also why you see these guys where they are now, despite not having that formal education. But in recognition of the fact that this is Singapore, this is Asia, the market is very, very different here. So, it's a different market. Let's take a different mindset. But I just want to highlight to you guys that to a certain extent, first of all, I applaud you all for daring to take the dive to look to change careers, but also that I think you have, if you're to change into any career in particular, I think IT is relatively based on merit and what you can deliver and how good you can be versus necessarily your education. And to be fair, the places that do prioritize that in Singapore that I've seen and talked to the people with, and even some of the interviewing and HR people, to a great extent, I would strongly suggest that those places are not the best place for you to start your footing as a software professional anyway. And in fact, a lot of the VEAP applicants that we've had, the reason we appeal to them so much has been because they have been in those positions where they've had the theory, they've had the university career, they've had the great score, they've interviewed with the right companies, and they've gotten that nice pretty badge that says, I don't know, what is it that's desirable here? DBS, KPMG, Deloitte, etc. Yeah, they have all that. But 2.5 years into their career, they're sitting there going, wow, am I really going to be here for another 2.5 years? And all I'm going to have is my next title after 5 years of effort? And to them, that doesn't resonate. Like, there's no passion in that. There's no joy in that. In fact, most of the time they kind of go, where the hell else can I go? Like, what are my other options? So that's why, yeah. So it's when I talk to those people about VEAP that they've also found some resonance. So I don't think that, I don't think that by going down the path that you guys have chosen, I don't think you're at any sort of a disadvantage whatsoever. And to a certain extent, that's what the VEAP recognizes. The program is structured to mainly focus on building practical software and deployment and higher level computing skills through a combination of practical hands-on application. So in our case, it means you will be a consultant, a very junior one, but you are still considered a consulting engineer. You will be working on client outcomes, and you will be delivering customer value from your very first, maybe not the first day, because it takes them longer than that to give you your account to get into the systems. But basically, you'll be expected to work with engineers and be part of engineering from day one. That will be complemented by directed learning opportunities, because there are certain things that we want you to focus on versus others. And we're more than happy to point you in the right direction and to also share, not just say, go study that, but also share with you, why do I believe you should study that? How I think you should study that? What do I believe to be the key value items in studying this thing for you? And naturally, I would like to think that you can focus on these value items much more than tooling. So, as a simple example of this, it may be really, really great that you guys have learned Node.js. And it may kind of be a thing that Java is not considered cool in the market these days, but it represents a large chunk of enterprise customers, and it represents a very mature ecosystem. Beyond if we kind of get away from the software engineering hat about languages, it has a lot of things that it can teach you about the practice of software development, software engineering, software reliability, software quality, etc. And I think, in your position, that is the kind of knowledge that will best set you up for your future. The core knowledge and the core competencies in the software professional space, rather than the Node.js or the React Native or the Java or the whatever it is that happens to be cool right now.
How long is the program, and what's the progression after the program?
Cool. The program at the moment is set for 2 years because we're doing the pilot. But based on the guys I've been interviewing so far, we are trying to find a way to make allowances for if people can overachieve that. And after that, we would expect everybody who finishes the 2 years to be at a minimum level of a senior associate engineer. But realistically, I'm imagining that the people we select should be at the engineer level. So straight after the program, you will just continue with what you've done, but at an engineer level. So hopefully by that time, that will mean that all the mentoring, guidance, and collaboration that you've had during your 2 years, you will then be able to turn around and be the senior to the next batch, which will also help develop you for your career, the next step of your career, being a more senior software professional.
Awesome. Great. I think maybe we can open up to Q&A. I think students have some questions as well.
No problem.
Hi, Allen. Thanks for coming down to speak with us today. I'm Alvin from Batch 1. Unfortunately, I haven't really seen the products and services that Versent is offering right now. Maybe you could give an overview of what kind of projects are currently in Singapore right now, if you can. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Versent's core competency is centered around DevOps and automation and cloud practice. So, yeah, we also we have quite a wide core competency because we come from that enterprise background in Australia. But the key things that we do in Singapore is around those. Recently, we added some elements of app dev, but we're also looking to figure out how to strategically position that in the market. But yeah, the things that we do most often with clients in Singapore revolve around CI/CD and the practices around developing software in a structured, disciplined manner, as well as deployment and management of prod environments. general upskilling, like in terms of best practices. And I hesitate to use the term agile, but yeah, agile software development, as well as the last, I don't really consider it a vertical as such, but I guess the more traditional consulting heartland. So this is where, for example, even as a principal engineer, I may be put in to help answer a question around, tell me, I want these guys to work on a project. I want these guys to, I want X, Y, Z. I need to be able to show this. I have this much budget. Should I be going all cloud, everything in the cloud? Should I be using latest technology X, et cetera, et cetera? And that's where you kind of have to you have to turn it from those kind of statements into some form of requirement. Once you have some kind of a requirement and you have understanding of the hard deliverables versus the soft deliverables, you then help them turn that into an actual solution space. Then from that solution space, you can then help them to craft an actual approach. And then from there, depending on how things go, we may hand that over as a set of tooling to an in-house team, or sometimes we try to pitch for the work ourselves so that our guys can execute and show you how these kind of tooling and these kind of practices can come together to let you deliver a project. But yeah, so that's a lot of what we do in the more consulting space of things. Does that kind of clarify that for you?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned something about CI/CD. Got something about that just now.
Yeah.
So correct me if I'm wrong. Versent is like a consultancy. So for example, a project could be helping a client who wants to maybe, I would say, adopt cloud technologies.
Mm-hmm.
So Versent will kind of create those software products and advise the client on how to set up their cloud infrastructure.
Okay, cool. Maybe this is where we need to go backwards a little bit. Okay, let's talk about CI/CD. Let's talk about cloud, and let's get those kind of things out of the way first, so that we are all talking the same things when we say those. Then then I'll extend from that to what the Versent business model is based in this space. Okay.
Yeah.
I hate to burst your bubble, but CI/CD stands for something really, really easy and simple. You know how you guys have been taught in your day-to-day that when you develop, always write tests, always run them, and always try to fix bugs as early as possible? Congratulations, that's CI, continuous integration. And CD just means before you assume that your job is done, you put it somewhere. Hopefully that is more or less reminiscent of prod, and you do some final checks. In fact, if it was prod that your code goes to as soon as possible, then great, you've got true CD. And CI/CD is actually not much more complicated than that. But of course, when you get into the mechanics and the philosophies of CI/CD, that's when you kind of start to gain a bit more scope for differences. And I think I have to put it this way as well. CI/CD is actually part of a discipline. And the discipline it represents is a common sense and repeatable, standardized approach, which will get you from no code to code running in production in a predictable, replicable manner. No more than that. And the reason it has become such a fancy thing in enterprise is, to be honest, frequently only because they ignore all those things. They ignore simple things like creating tests. A very, very common refrain is, oh, we've got 3 weeks. We need 3 weeks to do this, but I only want to give you 2 weeks. Tell you what, cut out the test. That should get rid of 1 week for us. Then you can finish your work in 2 weeks, right? So unfortunately in enterprise, these kind of statements happen way too often. Similar with what probably sounds very common sense to you guys. Did you start up your code, at least locally? Did you start it up and actually hit the endpoints and go, hey, I ran my automated tests. I've got some elements of functional or end-to-end testing, and I still spun it up and I tested some things myself. Congratulations. Most people in enterprise don't do that. So that's why CI/CD has been made up to be a much bigger deal than it is, because at its core, it's very, very simple. But as with most things simple, it can be very hard to understand because people want to complicate things. There's a lot of vested interest in complication. And similar with CD, people get very, very excited about saying that they do continuous deployment, mainly because the words that follow straight after is usually something like, just like Facebook or just like Google. But in reality, if you actually did CD in, say, most of our organizations are banking or finance related. If you did true CD there, MAS will walk right in, shut down all your servers and revoke your license. So there is the hype, and then there's the practice. And I like to think that part of the reason Versent is so strong and has got a position to stand on amongst organizations in Singapore is because we come from a space in the middle of the two. We understand the practices, we understand what they represent and what the outcomes you want from doing this are. And we can talk to that level, like, imagine like the CIO, CTO, head of IT level. We can talk to them and have genuine conversations with them to bring CI/CD and cloud and all these flashy hand words. We can kind of make them, okay, guys, let's put that aside now. Let's talk dollars and cents. It's going to cost you X to do this. You're going to have to help us with Y, and we will give you this outcome by this time. Does this seem like a valid measure of success that we can agree to beforehand? So that's how Versent works with these concepts with our clients. Similar thing with cloud. In Singapore, a lot of people seem to be of the impression that cloud is magic. It's somehow a panacea that will make all things good. I can develop stupid code. I cannot bother using Git. I cannot bother looking and reviewing at my code. But you know what? It's okay. I've got cloud. That will make it go away. Sorry, guys, it doesn't work that way. Cloud is just a different way. Cloud is just a different place and a different way of running your code. But at the end of the day, your code is still code. It will still somehow execute somewhere in a machine. It will still consume some form of resource, be it memory, IO, CPU, etc. And ultimately, it will have to serve an end purpose. And having something running in the cloud, that's not an end purpose. Having something run in the cloud because it gives you some kind of property that you need, like I need very, very fast responses. I need to be able to create a new environment to validate an idea very quickly. Great. The cloud will give you speed, will give you agility. I need to be able to experiment with infrastructure level changes. And I need to be able to do this in a way that doesn't bring down my current production services. Great. Cloud stacks can help you do that. There's a whole bunch of deployment strategies that can help you achieve that kind of thing. I want to spend $100,000 a year less on my infrastructure. If that's the extent of the statement, then chances are they're going to end up spending much more than they imagine, and they're going to be screaming at you after that implementation period. Because once you've done some work in the cloud, you very quickly realize the value of cloud is not in spending less. The value of cloud is in getting much more flexibility, much more velocity, and much more adaptability for your business with the same or just slightly more spend. It's a quality of outcome and the quality of the product that goes into the end system. It's that kind of a trade-off rather than just a raw, you will spend less dollars. So does that kind of help you kind of understand the context of CI/CD and cloud and how Versent can add value in that space?
Yes, I think you have gave a very good summary of what CI/CD is and how a cloud can benefit a company.
Cool. Yeah, and I wish it was more complicated, but to a certain extent, that is it. There's already IBMs, there's already Deloitte's, there's already Accentures. They're the ones who do the 20-page PDF presentations on cloud. So we tend to make our value case by being very, very specific and bringing cloud knowledge to hit business outcomes directly. That's our space.
So sorry, one more question, right? You mentioned that this is how Versent delivers its services by advising clients, like if they want to achieve A, what do they have to do to get to A? And in that sense, for software engineers or like for the DevOps and clouds engineers that the VEAP is focusing on, are you grooming them to become more of like advisors, or are you grooming them to be more of someone who can code out software products?
Cool. Good question. I think I'm going to say this. Even if you stretch the VEAP to its longest extent, it'll be 2 years. So if we combine the total time that you guys have spent, I believe the longest amongst you have spent maybe 6 months working on code so far. Yeah, cool. So if you add 6 months to 2 years on the VEAP, you're at a career that's about 2.5 years long. I don't think at that stage, you're going to be anything specifically. But what I would like to see that you are at that stage is a well-informed, well-educated software professional with a good understanding of what it is that you see in your future. Because off the basis of like all that the VEAP will teach you is how to think through technology and how to make intelligent decisions in the technology space. But this has very broad applicability for us because some people may want to become, product owners. Some people may want to become solution architects. Some people may want to become CTOs. But I think that all of those professions, especially in the world that we're in now, where everything is changing, where technology itself is increasingly going to come to the fore, I think very, very quickly we're going to find that the days where CTOs can claim to be non-technical and laugh off details like, ha, 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 oh yeah, I bought IBM. IBM is a big enough brand name, we should be safe. The days are coming to an end where that kind of excuses are going to be acceptable to shareholders and to the public. So I look at it as the VEAP is focused on DevOps and cloud practices in the short term, but really DevOps and cloud practices are just a mechanism to help you to learn the concepts and the practice of software value delivery. And that just means across the whole value chain. The software development process itself, the process of kind of translating, because obviously you're going to get a lot of people telling you a lot of things and you're going to have to learn how to take what they're saying, understand the core of what they're saying, and turn it into something that's a solution level. So, very quite similar to what you guys do as software engineers, where you get a requirement, you have to turn it into a spec, you then have to break it down into some kind of a solution space, etc. So guess what? Those patterns, they apply everywhere down the process of practicing as a software professional. I think that's also why I tend towards the term software professional, because really, no matter how you look at it, and no matter what the job title is, to a certain degree, all of those jobs share very, very common core elements. And they all tend to revolve around something like somebody will tell you something, they may or may not know what they're talking about to a certain extent. Your job in the middle is to add value by applying some sort of discernment, whether it's focusing on the features that are most valuable to customers, whether it's focusing on the way to correctly break this up to hit my software engineering goals, whether that is to allow the best throughput for my platform while spending as little money as possible. All of these are discernment type problems. And then ultimately, to be able to go through and understand your field, the technology itself well enough to then carry out whatever it is that you design and decided at the stage. And yeah, from my perspective, across the whole scale of software professionals, everything is just a slightly different version of that same concept.
I see. So the program is kind of like to educate us on what are the best practices in cloud and DevOps.
Yep. So you'll be guided by best practices, but for us, we will also be, to a certain extent, we'll also be drilling you in how do I validate that these are best practices? Like how do I, what I personally want to see is I want to see people who have an understanding of why a certain thing is the best practice. Because similar to software engineering, right? There's various times where the best call from an engineering perspective is to say, no, best practice does not apply here. The difference is though, you can't really make that statement unless you know best practice quite well and you understand the whys and the path that led to best practice. And if you don't, if you kind of can't do that part, then for now, it's probably best if you just stick to best practice. More often than not, it'll be the not so wrong solution.
Would it be correct to say then that it's kind of part kind of business consulting and part because Alvin was asking, is it more business consulting or more technical application?
Sorry, I skipped that part probably because I'm embedded in it too much. For the VEAP, it's going to be basically 99% engineering. And the 1% is because we do expect you to participate in certain agile rights. So we do like things like record a demonstration of functionality you build, automation you build. Then show it, do it in a showcase style and talk to it. Show everybody what you've done, talk about what you've done. And we will also love to incorporate the participants into things like we will have smaller team showcases where you kind of showcase amongst the VEAP people and the internal Versent staff what you've done. But if there's something particularly good, we will try to nominate people to go out to the Singapore level showcases, and hopefully we'll also be able to find some, big wins through the work that the VEAP guys will deliver. And yeah, we'll be looking to tap you guys on the shoulder to say, go to the APAC-wide showcase to show that all around. So, but that, relatively speaking, that's going to be, maybe one day in your 2 years or 2 days in your 2 years. It's not going to be an everyday thing.
Any other questions?
Hi, Alan. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kenry, and I'm also from Batch 1. Okay, I have 2 questions. The first one is, what language or what stack will you guys be using for DevOps or cloud? And the second one is, could you describe a day, as in what associate cloud engineer would do at a VEAP program?
Cool. All right. So first question is around the tooling. Okay. The fun thing about the DevOps space is the answer is nearly everything. So give me 1 second and I'll actually go read off the VEAP technology list, because we have prepared this to share with people about what they can expect to learn, and also because the customer has signed off on, this is what I want people to be well-rounded on as a engineer that I'm willing to engage. So that's how we defined what went into the program. And so what we've confirmed with the client as valuable to them in the industry is you will use some form of CI or CI/CD server tooling. So the ones we use on a normal basis are things like Azure DevOps, Jenkins, Bamboo. But obviously there's a lot of variance in between. We may be called to use GitLab. I know at one stage we're forced to look at GoCD. We use AWS code commit and the build pipeline stuff in there as well. So more or less something CI/CD pipeline enabling. We work with dependency management and package managers like Artifactory, Nexus, that kind of stuff. So maybe this is more relevant to our enterprise background. But what we tend to find is that there's a very, very heavy call for familiarity with Java. So you don't necessarily need to be a Java dev, but it probably wouldn't hurt. But you'll be familiar with Java, at least to the extent of the build process, the testing process, how to do things in that Java world. And when we say Java, we mainly mean Maven, because that tends to be the tool of choice in most places. And in terms of Java frameworks, Spring Boot is far and away hugely popular. So that's another thing where some basic concepts and basic familiarity with that will be great. The other ones in your wheelhouse, JavaScript. The one I've come across in the client engagement right now is React Native being heavily involved in the way they do mobile builds, both for iOS and Android. So yeah, familiarity with JavaScript would be great. We use a lot of containers, so familiarity with something like a Docker and Kubernetes is definitely very useful. Ansible, Puppet, Salt Stack, any of those kind of orchestration type tools, because depending on the exact client you're at, sometimes they don't mind using a tool that you determine. Sometimes you'll get there and find out that they've all set up, they've got a full-blown enterprise license Puppet master with everything ready to go, and they want you to fall into that. So some kind of a infrastructure / orchestration type tooling. Git. So most of the time we tend to, most places we work at now tend to go towards using Git. So, but within that space, there's a wide variety of what people use, like Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, the AWS code commit, or whatever the equivalent repo software is. Some orgs do GitHub, some orgs do GitLab, etc. So some kind of familiarity with a Git-based service, and obviously, fundamentally, Git itself. The Atlassian Suite. So Atlassian tends to be far and away the leader in enterprise space when it comes to managing the agile process. So it tends to be the usual Jira, Confluence, most of the time with Bitbucket if they do automation, but sometimes they swap that out for things. And a close second would be Trello, if you guys have ever touched that. And yeah, the rest of it is kind of the basics. Other than that, we tend to use Python, Bash, Groovy, sometimes a bit of Golang, where we want to present a pretty interface to end consumers. We tend to wrap the logic in Golang and produce a binary that can be run in different locations. So yeah, to a certain extent, the answer is everything is on the table, because it all depends on what fits the need. And now to the second part, So what does a typical day of an, I'm going to summarize this rather than a VEAP participant. I'm just going to say an engineer in general working on Versent, because I kind of see them both as the same thing. So a typical day as an engineer in Versent would, you probably want to get in early. You probably get in a little bit early, 5-10 minutes early, just to refresh yourself and to kind of catch yourself back up to where you were yesterday. Ideally, you would also check do a final Jira status check to make sure that your work and your times and everything, and you also have clear in your head what you need to call out at stand up. Then usually we start the day with stand up. So after a quick, go around to, to kind of check where everybody's at to make sure nobody needs any help or anybody needs any blockers resolved. We then typically no more than about 15 minutes. Sometimes it does get longer, but that tends to be because sometimes our sponsor is so busy that they like to get a wide overview at one session. So they'll rather call 3 or 4 or 5 different teams into one long session so they can kind of get a quick finger on the pulse before they head off to some meeting. And then after that, we tend to get into the engineering. So typically it'll be something like you'll go check your Jira ticket. You'll have some kind of a feature that describes automation. So if we pretend that you've just picked up a brand new ticket, you'll probably clarify with some other engineers to make sure that you all have a shared understanding that the ticket is correct and accurately describes what the feature is, what is the work involved, how far that needs to extend, and also how much, what is the success criteria for that particular bit of work. Then after that, once you're sure that you've gotten the right, you're on the right ticket, you know what you're doing, and you kind of know what the outcome is, you'll probably take a bit of time to plan ahead, kind of think about what it is that you're moving towards. That's where you tend to do things like, am I building a library? How should I best break this up for reuse? Do I need to break up another ticket because I actually see 2 or 3 things in here that really belong as individual utility kits, something like that. While you're going around that, you should have some more senior engineers around you. So like, for example, well, I get a lot of taps on the shoulders to come and I've got to sanity check something with you. Or, hey, I finished XYZ, would you like to have a look? Or, hey, I'm planning to do this, what do you think about this plan? So yeah, that kind of extends all through everyone. And even for some of the stuff that I do, I will sometimes gather some of the engineers together and say, hey, I need to grab 2 of you. I want to sanity check that what I've drawn is not just a bunch of random squares and squiggles, because that's not architecture. That's called wasting everybody's time. So yeah, that kind of process happens all around in every direction. And then the rest of the time, is just working on your tasks. So whatever your optimal work rhythm is, I would suggest that you try to massage your workday around your optimal rhythm. So for example, if you find that you're a person who prefers to headphones on and shut up in the morning and get everyone to leave you alone, then optimize around that. Do all your work in the morning and then kind of touch base with people, sanity check in the afternoon, that kind of thing. So, there's quite a bit of flexibility there because we have got a lot of variation between the people and the engineers. So work out what suits you. But all in all, that's pretty much a standard day as an engineer. Probably doesn't sound all that different from a standard day as a software engineer, yeah?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alan.
No problem. Cheers.
Hello, Alan. Joe here.
Hey, Joe.
And my question to you is, what would you advise to junior engineers to future-proof themselves?
The whole future-proof question. Yeah. The only thing that I can personally strongly recommend is the only thing that we know in technology is that it is going to change. In some worlds, that can be days, like JavaScript. The world can literally change in days. In some things, maybe not so much, like Java. That's been going for 20 years and it probably will go for much longer just because of inertia. But irrespective of all that, at some stage during our lifetime as an engineer, the only thing that we can count on is change. So then the obvious question becomes, what do we do? How can we best prepare ourselves to cope with this change? And to make it even more practical, most of the time when we're dealing with this change, we're getting bombarded with all these messages. Hey, there's this new JavaScript toolkit. I heard Google has people using it already, same with Java. Hey, there's this new cool library, there's new cool module, etc. So to a certain extent, my preferred approach to future-proofing would be always go back to the basics. In the world you're in, so for example, at the moment you may be using JavaScript, break down that world, extract what the essence of that world is. So for JavaScript, the things you want to look at are like software engineering principles, some of the algorithmic things, maybe some of the characteristics of the programming language, like what's the difference between an event, what happens when you have an event-driven architecture versus when you have a process-driven architecture, etc. Like, yeah, all those things that make JavaScript unique, I would focus in on those and understand those really thoroughly. Yes, you will probably happen to learn JavaScript and hopefully you'll become fairly good at it in the process, but I wouldn't obsess too much and I wouldn't spend too much time on the language itself. Think of it this way. JavaScript happens to be the tool that you're using to learn software engineering and software thought at the moment. Tomorrow it may still be JavaScript. It may be something completely different. But even if you pick up a new language, a lot of what you learned and what you're thinking from JavaScript should still be applicable. So I would strongly suggest that that's what you focus your core time in on. Like, rather than seeking to become a master of JavaScript syntax, become a master of JavaScript paradigms. And yeah, try to pick the paradigms that are not just methods to work around the fact that, you have to do really, really ugly nested callbacks.
Thank you so much. That was helpful.
No problem.
I have a question. So for junior engineers who are starting out in their career, how would you recommend that people kind of plan ahead for where they want to go in their career? Like, how much should they be trying to specialize in one particular area? How much should they be trying to get exposure across the stack? And how should they drive the progression?
Okay, cool. Now that is an excellent question. Cool. Yep. I think I'll put it this way. As a starting out software professional, I would strongly set myself the goal of having pretty good knowledge across the full stack. And I would say that ideally you would extend this stack to include some elements of the lower level than you may go normally in software. Like, for example, for me, that means at least a fundamental understanding of how your program interacts with the operating system and how, at least at a basic level, how that translates to processing. So that's probably fair enough. That's probably a lot lower level than a lot of you would have imagined. But again and again, the thing I find with more senior engineers is that as you get into more advanced discussions, you may sometimes find yourself in a situation where you literally do not know what you're talking about, but you're not even aware of the fact that you don't know what you're talking about because you've skipped that step. And for me, a classic representative of this is sitting in a room with a whole bunch of mid-level to senior level developers, and they're all arguing about shaving 2 or 3 milliseconds off a transaction, because then they'll have a good justification for it. Oh, our requirement is 10,000 requests per second, and we have to get processing time to within X. So therefore, we can't afford to lose 3 milliseconds in this flow. But then, depending on what exactly is happening around that process, if all you know is the code, so let's pretend that this whole screen is your complete system. Usually, in a fully functioning deployed system, code maybe represents about this much of the screen. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to shave 2 to 3 milliseconds off time, and you're trying really, really hard to look for it somewhere in this space. But a lot of people don't realize there's all this other space that is left for you to explore as a place to potentially get those savings that you're looking for. So that's the only thing I tend to find when people don't have at least a little bit of knowledge down further, that they become so software centric and they become so focused only on the code aspect that they become tunnel visioned. And the problem is, a lot of the time, once you get beyond a junior programmer or a junior person, your focus has to be systemic. And the only difference between a senior engineer and, say, a principal or solution architect is that a more senior engineer may look at a system as a whole. a principal may look at a system as in the context across the whole business. But either way, you really need to start training that vision. You need to start realizing that systems represent so much more than only those bits of code or those artifacts or those things that go into certain places. It's much more than that one server in the corner. It's much more than that cloud subnet over there. All of that actually comes together to form your actual solution, because all of that is potentially a space that you can find innovation, improvement, speed, uplift, or even just something really cool for you to play with for the next period of time. So yeah, I would strongly suggest get experience across. You don't have to necessarily become an expert, but definitely try to get yourself, familiar with all the basic software paradigms and all that kind of stuff. Then something like the VEAP would help give you some exposure on the, some of the process flows things. So a lot of things that you do as part of your software development, that'll kickstart your thinking about, why do I do this? So you start to think about not just doing the software development practices, but also why you do them, how you do them, what's the benefit of doing them? Because then, sometimes you'll be put in a position where you'll say, I know the best practice is X, but in the context of where I am right now with what is happening around me, I probably shouldn't do this. And in fact, it'll be detrimental to do this. So yeah, definitely
Awesome.
don't jump around too much. Don't try to do too much in one go. There's no point learning 3 or 4 or 5 different languages at once, which is probably why you guys have focused in on JavaScript. But definitely try to embed that until you feel comfortable with it and the concepts. But at that stage, by the time you feel like you're relatively comfortable, that's probably a key indicator that it's time to get yourself uncomfortable all over again.
Great advice.
Hi, Allen. I have another question. The question is, what do you love the most about working for Versent?
What do I love the most about working for Versent? I think I'm a very simple person. The thing I've loved the most so far has been food. I've always found somewhere or another to make food a core of something that we do. So that's one thing my team is known for. And hey, I do a lot of food events, but I always have a very, very strong business rationale and business return for the food. So I like to think of that as one of the things that, first of all, that in Versent, we have leeway to have those kind of conversations, but more importantly as well, because pragmatically, the benefits are not small. The benefits are not small at all. So even though I personally love food and it just happens to be a thing for me, but it also is a great focus and is a great way to build and strengthen a team and to kind of just achieve so many things. Software engineering and software practice as a whole does not exist in a vacuum. Food just happens to be another great tool to bring that whole, all the participants together. And what's hard to like about food, right? So yeah, and when that enables a whole team to sit down, to laugh, to play, to chat, to eat together, hey, guess what? A bunch of software engineers eating lunch together do. They talk about the problem they're working on. They talk about this cool new software algorithm. Like just this morning, one of my ex-colleagues pinged me. He had found this cool new algorithm that seemed to use two linked ring buffers, but they found a way to algorithmically twist them. Because if you did it that way, it's as if you had a Mobius loop, which is infinite. So we were kind of looking at that for a while, going, ooh, wow. And yeah, apparently you do have a lot of increased overhead, but you get a lot of additional throughput, because the reason you twist the 2 rings is because one represents memory access in kernel space, the other one represents memory access in user land. But if you twist it, you effectively enable DMA. And the nice thing about DMA, if you can not have security concerns of breaching the barriers, is that you get increased throughput as a benefit. So yeah,
Thank you, Allen.
So yeah,
a number of us are applying to jobs now, and there are, of the companies that we are applying to, there are a good number that are, we could say, product companies, and the others that we could say are more consultancy or agency type companies. How would you evaluate the differences between these 2 kinds of work environments, and what are your thoughts on those?
Oh, okay. I think so this is completely from my own perspective. So please do understand that this needs to come with an overlay of your own personal thinking and what it is that you want and what it is that guides you. From my perspective, for my personality, the differences between the 2 are probably relatively negligible. And I think the key thing I'll the key thing I'll give is this. If you really want to hone in and focus on the deeply technical aspects of what is happening in the software development process as a first-class citizen, the product-based companies where you are part of the direct product team, that will probably give you better scope and better ability to engage in that sort of thing and that kind of exploration. Only because in a product company, their number one priority is the product. So usually, as long as you can talk in terms of the benefits of you doing something, whether it's a low-level thing, a high-level thing, a refactor, whatever, as long as you can give a strong enough case for the benefit to the product, you usually will get an okay to go ahead and do it. So that's probably one of the only key things that sticks out for me. Because in contrast to that, the consulting firm, that's probably where you do lose a little bit. Sometimes you do have a lot of space to get creative and you do get really, really good at applying technology intelligently. But the reason you'll get good at that is because you'll be faced with constraints all the time. I have to use this tool because that's the tool that we say you use. You have to do things this way because that's the embedded process in our organization. You have to go down this path, even if it makes absolutely no sense, because somebody said to do it that way and I haven't been here long enough and I don't really care. So that's the negative side of consulting. There are those elements. But on the other hand, just like in art, which is a creative, people think that art is creative and somehow engineering is not. But I would say that by the time you're starting to get into the space of software, you can't help but be creative. Because if you are creative, you will very, very quickly notice yourself picking up advantages and getting way ahead of everyone else who is not. It's that simple. And fundamentally, it's because it is a creative process. And just like any creative process, some restrictions and some boundaries are actually not bad for enabling, sometimes the best way to force you to do out-of-the-box thinking is to actually say, well, here is the actual box. So therefore, what can I do within these constraints?
Awesome, thank you.
I have one more quick question.
No problem.
Just wanted to check with you, what is your go-to place to get insights and the information regarding what is trending in the developers community, and what are the tools in use and what are the best practices of sort? I mean, basically what's trending in the community of developers?
Okay.
Yeah.
Very interesting one. To a certain extent, how do I approach that? Oh, okay, yeah, I do that. I focus in. Yeah. Now, first of all, I tend to achieve that by focusing, because to a certain extent, I am personally not interested in everything in the world. I'm interested in very, very specific things. So for me, I now tend to focus in on certain spaces. For me, my key area of interest is actually high performance computing, for example. So what I tend to do is I tend to find some sources that are representative of that particular interest. So for me, it's things like Discord. Discord is a great one. Netflix is still good. Google used to be, but I'm finding that they're becoming a little bit passé. So they still have very, very interesting, thought-provoking things once in a while, but they're just not worth me following on that regular basis anymore. But that tends to be how I keep up to date with what is happening. And to be frank, yeah, it's because I made a conscious decision. I don't want to follow the general trends, because then that just becomes too many things, too broad, all over the place. So yeah, I know that's not an ideal answer, but again, that's in direct response to the earlier situation. The world of software is now so broad, and there's so much tools and so much thought happening in that space. How do you gain an idea of what's relevant, what's not? How do you stay up to speed? And I think ultimately you would say that to try to stay on trend is itself a waste of time. Find something that is very, very, very relevant to you and understand where the thought is heading. Whether or not it turns out to be a trend, that's a different matter. But if you understand where things are heading at that point in time, at least then if it proceeds onwards, you know how and why and how things developed. If it reverses itself and goes another direction, you also kind of have a bit of understanding about why that was the case. So yeah, if you want a very clear example of this for me was, oh gosh, it would have been about 8 years ago when I tried to I was trying to look at JavaScript at that stage. And at that time, I remember it was Ember. That's right. Ember.js was all the hotness, and it was really awesome. And at the time, Ember was truly state of the art. They had a really nice, they had a really nice data binding model on callback and all that kind of stuff. So like stuff that you guys take for granted now in the modern JavaScript frameworks. So back in that time, I was looking at it kind of going, oh, wow, is it worth my time getting into Ember? Is this really cool? But then, well, to a certain extent, it was by accident, but in the end, I tried JavaScript a little bit and I decided that it just didn't mesh with me personally. So at that point, I was like, nah, JavaScript, it's cool. And I want to know the threads of what's happening in JavaScript land, but it's not an environment that I personally want to dive into myself. So I put that by the wayside. But then when I turned around a year later, all of a sudden Ember had basically disappeared. People no longer talked about it. It was basically no longer anywhere on the scene. In fact, at that time, it was Angular. I think everybody was like, oh, Angular. So yeah, for me, that kind of highlighted exactly that. Don't try to go off in too many directions, and like, don't worry too much about picking the trend, because trends come and go, and you can only really, like, from a data perspective, you can only really pick a trend after the trend has happened, which is of no use to you whatsoever. So you're much better off just focusing on what you think your unique interests or your unique capabilities are, and then trying to keep up to date with the thinking in that space rather than the trend. And it sounds like I'm trying to say exactly the same thing, but in different words. But I hope that if some of you kind of go off and try to search through those two different lenses, like think of the area that you're thinking of keeping up to date with and go off and do a bit of a Google search and try to take those two different lenses for yourself. On the one hand, try to think about, I'm going to search for what is trending, what is hot. And on the other hand, try to search more for what are the people thinking? What is the reason people are doing things in this space? Try to search for those two different things. And I think you'll find very, very quickly why, even if you pick the wrong thing and you spend some time reading about the thinking that was wrong, you still gain some benefit out of that.
That was awesome. Value in going deep in a particular specialty area instead of just following all the general trends all the time. Yeah. Okay, unfortunately, I think we need to wrap up a little bit. Alan, maybe one last question for you is, would you have any general advice for all of our bootcamp students here today who are anywhere between 1 to 3 months away from graduation and about to embark on their journeys? What would that advice be for them starting this journey?
Yep. I think I'm going to say this. Actually, and the irony here is back in Australia, my own brother and my sister-in-law, they just went through a boot camp over there as well. So yeah, they went with a different mob. It's General Assembly over in Australia, but they've just gone through a similar experience. My brother graduated first. He's still jobless 6 months later. My sister-in-law got a job offer before she finished her course. And the key difference was this. She started reaching out, expressing interest, and chatting with and engaging the community way ahead of time. She was talking to people from the get-go, via LinkedIn, in person, recruiters, events, all that kind of thing. She was out there chatting with people. Don't be shy of who you are. I'm a person who's new to this industry, but be kind of happy to kind of say, hey, I'm really enthusiastic to learn because I'm new to this. Let's chat a little bit. And yes, she did get some rejections, and my brother got relatively not that many, but hey, she landed a job before she finished, and he's still out there looking. And for me, that was the biggest difference. Every time I talked to her, she was telling me about how she was meeting somebody, she was going to chat with somebody, she reached out to somebody on LinkedIn after exchanging ideas, etc. And that was the difference. Get out there.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Alan.
Cheers.
Thanks
you very
so
much
for the
your
wisdom.
time.
Thank you, Alan. And have a good day. Thanks. Hope to see some resumes coming your way soon.
Well, let's see. But yeah, take care, everyone.
Take care. Thank you.